RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in here today. We're going to have a great show for you. Very, very important topic. We're going to talk about expanding Canada's agricultural trade. If you want to participate in today's discussion and ask our guest, JP Gervais, Chief Economist with Farm Credit Canada, if you want to ask him a question or provide some commentary, all you got to do is participate by entering it in the comment box, whether you are watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch. And we love when you participate. That's what makes this program so unique. There's nothing else like it, and we're glad to bring it to you every single day at 3 p.m. Eastern, 1 o'clock Mountain. Well, you know what? Let's not delay anymore. Let's get right to it. Let's bring in today's guest. It is JP Gervais, like I said, Chief Economist with Farm Credit Canada. JP, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks so much, Shaun. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, JP, Farm Credit Canada released this report on trade. Before we get to some of my questions, give us, from a broad perspective, what your report was trying to get across.
Well, we decided this year to focus on food. Last year, we did the same exercise, looking at diversification, growth opportunities in the industry, but from really a commodity standpoint. And this year, we thought, well, let's look at food because it does have a lot of potential for us to grow. We in the industry set some bold objectives, right? Getting to $75 billion worth of exports by 2025. And the industry itself, that's the government target. The industry itself actually set an $85 billion target. So we got a long way from 85. I think we are on pace to reach that 75 billion by 2025. But the idea is how we're going to get there, right? And, the U.S., we're fortunate to be located next to the largest economy in the world, but when it comes to expanding trade, also we probably have to look elsewhere. So where do we look and how do we go about it is a little bit of how we're approaching this report.
Okay, so there's variables here that are in our control, and there's variables that are completely out of our control. Some of the data that when we published the story on the report on Real Agriculture, when we published the details on realagriculture.com, I'll pull out this paragraph. Canada ranks 5th as a global agricultural commodity exporter and 12th as a processed and prepared food and beverage exporter as of 2019. Canada's total food, beverage, and commodity exports last year were worth roughly $67 billion, an increase of almost 10% since 2015. Food exports increased by 27.8%, while food and beverage exports represented less than half of the total value. So I guess looking at that, JP, is there any low-hanging fruit left, so to speak? Like, if we are going to make gains in trade, there's some serious legwork, and I guess there's some serious effort that has to take place in order to make it happen.
Absolutely. And I think you set this up really properly, Shaun. What we're doing in the report is looking at it from top down, right? So we have the data by the end of 2019. It says where are we? But we know that the data that we're looking at actually is generated bottom up, right? So data that we have reflect decisions that are made at the business level, right? So the large food processors, we don't have to name them, but we know what they are, and they export to multiple destinations already, right? So if we are going to diversify and grow, I think it's going to have to come from small and medium-sized businesses. The one thing we know as well, talking to our customers at FCC, some of the research as well that exists out there, is that to be successful in an export market, you have to build that export intensity. In other words, you're going to have to start exporting to maybe 1-2 destinations, and then you're going to start building that export scale like anything else, right? You got to have a little bit of experience, a little bit of scale and so forth, to before you can start broadening your horizons and then look at different markets. So in some ways, as we're looking to grow, we may see short-term less diversification as we have small and medium-sized businesses. That's certainly what we're focused on at FCC, is to help those small and medium-sized businesses grow, start building that export intensity, and then start branching out, look at different destinations. And of course, if you start saying, all right, where am I going to start? Well, it makes sense to look at the US. I mean, it's a market that's been growing for us. It's right next door. We can say a lot of things about the US. You and I have had lots of discussions about the climate there, both political climate and economic climate. And then at the end of the day, it offers some opportunities to grow and then start branching out to different destinations. But the low-hanging fruits, still in that building that intensity, I think it's feasible. Then that's going to be hard to get the other markets though.
Yeah, okay. There's a few things there I want to really unpack. Let's go back to the small and medium-sized companies and how they participate more in these trade deals. And I remember before he took a bit of a short-term leave because of health reasons, Jim Carr talked about how, we've put the agreements in place, but we need to assist companies in accessing these deals. Because if I'm a medium or a small size company that has an opportunity to export, JP, I don't have the internal resources to understand maybe what some of my opportunities even are. How do we close that gap?
Yeah, I totally agree. I would go one step further even, and I would be so bold as to say that if you look at, we got everybody, all suppliers have, strengths and weaknesses. I mean, in our case, we're great at getting market access in theory. We have great product innovations. We've done lots with regards to product innovations. We get the market access. We got to know how we're productive. Lots going for us. I think the one thing that we haven't invested so well in the recent years has been on marketing. We are not the greatest marketers, and that involves, getting your product from, your farm gate or your plant to market. And I think this is where businesses need some help. How do you market yourself in these foreign markets? How do you develop the relationships with the traders, the buyers? Because ultimately, it's very rarely you're going to get to talk directly to the end consumer or even the retailer. So how do you get involved in those supply chains? And I think a lot of it is on the marketing side. I think we need to maybe ramp up or step up our game a little bit on the marketing side, because we have lots going for us. I think that's the one area where I would focus is on the marketing side.
Okay, so I'm gonna extend that. Yesterday we had Carlo Date from the Canada West Foundation on this show talking about China specifically, but I have heard he made a comment, and I've heard it from several others, that one of the things that Canada is not doing in enough countries is having enough boots on the ground, people on location in these countries where we're trying to increase agricultural trade. And that's just not government. That's also, people that are working for some of the people who are trying to export. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
Well, trade associations, and so like you said, it's not just government. I think it's a fair argument for sure to say that we probably need more resources, and I think that's part of the marketing story as well, the know-how as well, to understand how the supply chains work, the trade missions and all of these things. I think are all part of what I was referring to as marketing. Is just make sure that we can market our products aggressively, market our brand. So it's also about branding. I think we got a good brand. Do we leverage it to the fullest extent, or do we maximize the potential of our brand? Perhaps not in some markets. So there's just those type of things to be thinking about, and for sure having more resources invested in establishing. Right, there's a fixed cost of establishing those relationship with buyers. Whether it's through boots on the ground or any other means, and so those fixed costs. You need some scale a little bit, right? So hence the reason why, start small, start closer, and then, just start branching out. And I do think that's feasible because the demand's there. It's demand's there. Products are great. It's the execution, I think, that, we need to step up a little bit.
Okay, so do you see the greatest opportunities going forward in the raw agricultural commodities, or do you think there's opportunity here for, finished or processed goods, or even to something we would qualify as food?
Well, this report definitely focuses on food, and so I do think there's lots of potential. I would say, if I look at a lot of different products, so you have to look product by product, right? Or category, tariff line by tariff line, see where you're at. What are the big markets out there? So that's number one. What are the markets that are growing the fastest? That's number two, because at the end of the day, if you want to expand in a market, you're going to have to either steal market share, or you're going to have to convince somebody that was not buying the product to buy it now, right? So the market's big, you have more chances to be successful. If the market's growing, you don't have to steal market share. You can just tap in the growth that exists, or that occurs year after year. So that's two things: size of the market, growth. And then third is, have we been successful in this market? So in the fully diversified world, let's just say Canada supplies 10% of everything that's sold in the world market for product X. So if we were fully diversified, we would be selling in each of the import market 10% of what they buy. Obviously, it's not going to happen, and that's not desirable to do that. But where do we have a market share that is lower than our weight in the global markets, right? What are the markets where we're selling less than 10% and where you find it reasonable to expect that we could sell a little bit more? And so combining these three things, size of the market, growth in that market, as well as where are we underrepresented right now, at the end of the day, we got to look at 5 different sectors. We publish one more sector on our website. At the end of the day, there's no surprises out there, right? It's Europe, and a lot has been said recently about our trade deal with the Europeans, and then in Asia, whether it's China, smaller, everything's relative, but smaller economies as well in Asia. So Europe and Asia, most potential to diversify and grow for sure, in my opinion.
It depends on who you talk to, because some people will say, yeah, okay, JP, that's great. But I think, you mentioned, of course, naturally, you're going to focus on the U.S. first, and the second might be China, or maybe vice versa, because of just how big of a market those two places are. But, can you afford to consolidate where basically, those are the two markets you're relying on, because we hear so much about trade diversification. So, how do we balance that?
Well, it's a delicate exercise for sure. As I said, I mean, you first of all, the last thing you want to do is to have a top-down approach where you're going to dictate where things are going to happen, right? Businesses are going to have to make it profitable and sustainable for them, and so I fully trust that businesses are in the best position to make the decisions as to where you're going to sell, build that export intensity, familiarize yourself with exporting, and I'm really here talking about small to medium-sized food processors. There'll be gains as well throughout the supply chain for everybody, right? I mean, people talk about the pandemic and how it redefines the entire supply chain. Yes, supply chain may look to source ingredients and products more locally. Consumers want that. I get it. I think there's a huge opportunity for us in this pandemic is to get out of there, establishing ourselves as a global leader when it comes to food security. There are tons of food importers out there that are never, ever going to be self-reliant, when it comes to food supply. And I think we have a major opportunity in saying, hey, we're the food secure exporter here. We can help you achieve food security by being reliable, leveraging our reputation quality-wise and so forth. And I think, I'm not worried about the pandemic. I do think that, at the end of the day, we can leverage that card of food security and as an exporter, knowing that, consumers are going to look for local solutions. I do think that's going to happen, though.
Question here from Kara, getting back to what you're talking about with the marketing. How do we increase this marketing then? What sort of resources can small to medium businesses look at to really leverage themselves?
It's a very good question. I've heard a number of options, really, right? So sometimes, when we're talking about resources, if you put resources into marketing, the funny or ironic thing is that there are resources available. It's just that, in a lot of cases, whether the government, semi-public resources or private-public partnerships or whatnot, it's hard for businesses to understand where to go, right? So am I talking about just getting a little bit of help, a little bit of financial support to get product from A to B, or am I actually trying to get help, understanding what are the regulations that are expected at the point of purchase so that make sure that my product meet all those specifications, or whatever the help and support you need. It's really hard for businesses, small and medium, to understand where they go, right? So there's obvious resources, Trade Commissioner Office and so forth, but people are talking about, well, how can we collect and assemble all these resources together, right? Some have some sort of a concierge service for exporters, right? That's an idea that I've heard more and more that businesses would benefit. So there are a number of different things that we can be done at the industry level. Obviously, we're probably going to need a little bit of government involvement as well in this, and then just try to collect, assemble, and make it easier for businesses. Because I think that's the one thing I hear over and over again, right? I mean, we talk about regulations, we talk about making it easier for businesses, and I do like a concierge service was one example that was pitched a number of times.
Yeah, it's sort of like a hotel. We want to take a boat trip down the canal. How do we do that? It's a hand holding exercise. So of course, processors and farmers, they have different interests at different times. throughout the value chain. Right now, we are seeing a pretty good appreciation. I may be understating that, but a pretty good appreciation in commodity prices. So when prices are low, we look for solutions, and one of those solutions is, we need to increase market access. We need to work on market development. I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but we need that because I need these prices to be higher because I'm underwater. Right now, we have a situation where we got, in the near month, corn at 4.25 and 3/4. We got soybeans at 11.75 and 3/4. Pretty good prices. Farmers are going to make some money. It can be a challenge because the farmer is saying right now, I'm making money. What do we care? What trade's going great. Am I overstating that? Am I broad brushing that too much?
No, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, I know short term, I mean, you're looking at some of the pricing we have in the marketplace and everybody feels happy about it, right? But the idea is that long term, what you want to have as a seller is faced with multiple options. You want to have multiple buyers available, ideally at all points in time, right? And obviously there'll be some situations because of whatever conflict there is, between countries or whatever supply chain disruption there is in the marketplace. You're not going to be able to exercise and fully leverage that entire set of buyers that are in the marketplace. But the more options you have, and if you look at the livestock sector, I mean, clearly right now, I mean, the discussion that I'm hearing out of Western Canada, for example, is this concentration in packing plants, or one of the conversations as well that is occurring right now in the industry between processors and retailers is how do we work better together? Because forcing down costs to upstream, so the processors, for their access to online channels of the major retailers is not necessarily a long-term solution that's viable for the entire industry. And then think of that, you think of the relationship between processors and retailers. Well, farmers have a vested interest in saying that, this is as smooth and efficient as possible, because at the end of the day, everything, gets moved up and down the supply chain. So to me, I think the long-term perspective here is that, I want to make sure that I have a strong domestic processing industry. I want to make sure I have markets that are open as possible, as efficient as possible, getting there as well when it comes to selling commodities overseas. And the more options producers have, the better off they'll be. I have no doubt about that.
Do you think we're doing enough to attract diversity of competition in the processing sector? Of course, we have, a good example always is Protein Industries Canada. I think is a good initiative, but pulses aren't the only thing that we have in Canada. Are we doing enough to attract the diversity of processors so that we have more options for farmers to sell to and more options for our export customers to buy from?
Yeah, so it's a question that deserves a bit of a qualification, if we're going to focus on primary processing versus secondary processing, yep, and so forth, right? So I do think that the more we can add value, so I understand that in a lot of different cases, right, to have an efficient industry and an efficient supply chain, primary processing is not going to be, there's going to be some concentration in the industry at the primary processing level to get the efficiency, to get the scale. And that's what we learned over the years. I mean, it's going to be hard to expand that. Yet, and if you think of secondary processing and the fact that we can add value, I think that's where we can probably do more as an industry. And FCC is only part of the solution in terms of, has a role to play in terms of making sure that we have financial solutions that are allowing those smaller food processors to grow with the size of the market, both domestically as well as in foreign markets. I do think that we're doing quite a bit now. Can more be done? Absolutely. I think everybody's working in that direction. You talked about the cluster that was set up in the pulse industry. So I do think that there's some really good lessons as well. We're talking about the same size or same type of model. There are some different partnerships that can be leveraged throughout the supply chain to make sure that we leverage all our strengths.
Well, look at that Kraft Heinz plant, that announcement that came out on tomatoes this week. The Quebec government's put in $2 million. So it just wasn't them attracting the Heinz to do the investment here. It wasn't just about sweet talking them. It was bucking up too, which sometimes taxpayers have issues with, but that seems to be the way the business is done now to try to attract some of these large companies with the consolidation that's happened.
Yeah, and when you pick a sector like food, where we know that there's growth, we know that there's demand, we're investing in a sector that is going to deliver returns for Canadians overall, and certainly for people in the supply chain, or businesses in the supply chain. So I do think that there is quite a bit of upside in terms of us developing that capacity to fill a lot of demand in domestically as well as in foreign markets.
Yeah, and I remember back to the beginning of COVID. I remember the Prime Minister talking about how well, we're trying to keep the beef home, and some people, including people in the beef industry, were like, oh, don't say that. We have export markets that we're trying to. This is a short term thing. There's not going to be a shortage. We don't want to give the perception that our export customers will be left empty handed, and I guess the latter argument ended up being probably the truth because there never was a beef shortage, and
Yeah,
we've done a reasonable job exporting beef this year. It's a little bit disappointing for September, but overall decent. Go ahead.
yeah, and obviously, when you're in it, right, the crisis. I mean, it's a relevant question to think about the food supply, and making sure that we have enough. But you're absolutely right. I think we got to pay attention in that reliability of us as a supplier in the world markets. And as I said, I do think that food security is a big issue and a big play for us. I do think that there are tons of food importers out there that are not food secure. We can help. We can help them get there.
Let's finish up with this, JP. Let's say all of the stakeholders, okay, that you got them all in a room, and we're back to the days where we could all get in a room. We're all in a room, and they asked JP Gervais, okay, how do we increase food exports? What do we do? What would you tell them?
I'm helping small and medium-sized businesses grow their export intensity, grow their scale of production so that they consider one export market. I'm making sure that as a other business in the supply chain, whether a supplier or a customer of that business, that I don't get in the way, because I see a stronger food processing. In this case, talking about the report, I see a stronger food processing sector being an engine of growth at all levels of the supply chain. I think producers having more options to sell, and think retailers having more options to source their products from. So I would really love if we could just take this broad supply chain perspective and say that the success of one level of the supply chain is a success of the entire supply chain.
Okay, well, I lied. I also got something else to follow up with you on to finish up. Anything from the Canadian economic perspective that you want to mention that's catching your eye, good or bad?
Well, I got lots of questions on vaccines recently, because I did say a number of times that don't wait for the Bank of Canada to tell you that they're going to raise interest rates, because it'll be too late by then. And so a lot of people are following up with me and saying, well, you did mention that. What would be the signal? Oh, you did talk about the signals that would lead up to a recovery, lead up to the market expecting a recovery down the road. And is this soon enough for, because we've seen the stock market, right? Look at where it is right now. In a lot of cases, and a lot of different indexes breaking up the 52-week highs. And so, but when you look at the bond markets, it's not there, right? So yes, vaccines are encouraging for economic growth. I'm really don't want to get into that public health space, but the introduction of vaccines is obviously a good news story when it comes to economic growth. But markets are, aside from the stock market, financial markets are somewhat very prudent right now and cautious about what this means for the economic outlook. I still believe that the last few percentage points when it comes to GDP, so into 2021, that's going to be really difficult to get to.
It's going to be a very, very fascinating watch here. What happens throughout the rest of the 2020 into the first quarter of 21, and do we continue to see the strong commodity buying that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 months from China from a farmer's perspective? But also, of course, as we look at the broader market, as well as you alluded to, it's been a rather hot stock market, and it's a little bit. I saw this morning they were talking on CNBC about how before on good news people would sell, and we're just seeing a situation now where today's investor, there's a lot of people that are just on good news they're buying, And this is a different kind of investment we've seen in the past. So what goes up must come down always is one of the rules. And so we watch with interest. And the calling of that is that's for smarter people than me. That's for more like the JP Gervais of the world. Hey, JP, this has been a lot of fun. Always love having you here on RealAg Live. All the best to you, and thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Shaun. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today to RealAg Live. Don't forget to check out RealAg Radio today at 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. We're going to have a discussion with Lauren Hadley of the CPTA. Interesting stuff. There's a bit of a seed caper going on again this year, just like last year, where Kazakhstan buyers are trying to illegally import Canadian seed genetics, and we need to keep our head up about this because it is illegal. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.